The silver-haired widow rose from her chair, her hand trembling not with weakness but with power. In front of the entire family, she pressed a button, and her daughter-in-law's cruel words filled the air. "The old woman won't know what hit her." Gasps cut through the night. Faces turned pale, and for the first time, everyone saw her not as fragile, but as unbreakable. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel so you won't miss the next story that might brighten your day. The kitchen was silent except for the ticking of an old wall clock and the faint hum of the oven. Helena sat alone at the table, her slender fingers wrapped around a teacup that had long gone cold. At 68, she looked every bit the quiet widow, her back slightly bent, her silver hair pulled neatly into a bun, her eyes tired but alert. The smell of stale bread clung to the room, a reminder of the life she once built with her late husband, Thomas. Together, they had raised their son and built a bakery that kept the town fed for decades. Now, the bakery stood half abandoned, and the warmth that once filled this house seemed to have drained away. She stared at the flickering flame inside the oven, letting her mind wander to nights when Thomas used to lean against the doorway, teasing her about burning another batch of bread, kissing her cheek before heading off to bed. He had been gone for years, but he made sure she was safe. The deed to the house and the bakery, along with his will, were locked firmly under her name. No one could take that from her, at least that's what she thought. The sound of laughter upstairs pulled her back. Aaron, her only son, had been different since his marriage. He used to be gentle, a boy who carried flour on his shirt and called her his hero. But now, when he came home, his eyes were heavier, his words shorter, as if the bond between them was something he no longer had time for. His wife, Clara, polished and ambitious, had filled the space Helena once held. Clara treated the house as if it were her stage, walking through the halls like she already owned them. That evening at dinner, the three of them sat together. Helena had prepared roasted chicken, potatoes, and a salad, the kind of meal that once drew Aaron to the table with boyish excitement. But tonight, Clara pushed her food around her plate with an impatient sigh. "This house feels so outdated," she said casually, but her voice carried an edge. "Aaron and I have been talking. A remodel would do wonders. Maybe tear down a wall, get rid of that old oven. It's time for something more modern. And honestly, Helena, wouldn't you be more comfortable in a smaller place? Less to take care of at your age?" Helena looked across the table at her son. Aaron kept his eyes down, chewing slowly, pretending not to hear. He didn't speak, didn't defend her. She felt her heart tighten, but her face stayed calm. She folded her napkin and set it down gently. "This house has stood strong for half a century," she said softly. "It has carried this family through storms you can't even imagine." Clara gave a thin smile, sipping her wine. "Storms are one thing, but times change, don't they, Aaron?" Aaron shifted, finally muttering, "Maybe Clara's right. It might be easier if," but his voice trailed off and he didn't finish. Helena didn't argue. She never did. Instead, she quietly excused herself, her steps measured, her hands steady. Anger would only give them power. Silence, she knew, could be sharper than any weapon. The next day, as she walked back from the market with flour tucked under her arm, she ran into Mrs. Whittaker, her elderly neighbor. "Helena, you look pale," the woman said kindly. "Is everything all right at home?" Helena forced a small smile. "I'm fine, just tired." But Mrs. Whittaker leaned closer, lowering her voice. "That daughter-in-law of yours, she talks too much at the salon, says big things about money and plans for the future. Be careful, Helena. Sometimes it's the ones closest to us who strike the deepest." Helena thanked her, but her hands clenched tighter around the bag of flour as she walked away. That night, when the house was quiet and the lights had gone out, Helena sat awake in her room, unable to sleep. A faint murmur rose from downstairs. She slipped from her bed, bare feet gliding across the floor, and moved silently down the staircase. Through the half-open door, she saw Clara at the kitchen table, phone pressed to her ear, her voice low and sharp. "Once we get her signature, the house and the bakery are ours," Clara whispered. "Erin, stop worrying, she's old. She'll sign whatever we put in front of her." Helena's pulse quickened. From her vantage point in the hall, she saw her son sitting beside his wife, rubbing his temples. His voice was faint, tired. "I don't like this. She's my mother." Clara leaned in closer to him, her tone cutting like glass. "She's a roadblock, Erin. Don't you want a future with me? Do you want to be stuck in this drafty old house forever? Think of what we could build if we had control." Helena stepped back, her heart pounding, but her face gave nothing away. She could have stormed in, demanded answers, shouted her pain into the room. But she didn't. She turned and climbed the stairs, each step slow, steady, deliberate. Back in her bedroom, she opened the old oak drawer and pulled out the sealed envelope that held the deed and her husband's will. Her fingers traced the edge of the paper, and slowly, a smile curled across her lips. It wasn't the smile of a broken woman. It was the smile of someone who knew the storm was about to change direction. She slipped the envelope back into place, closed the drawer, and whispered to herself, her voice calm but laced with steel. "They think I'm weak. They have no idea who they're dealing with." The night stretched on, and Helena lay in bed with her eyes open, the whisper of Clara's voice still echoing in her ears. But now the fear was gone. In its place was resolve. The game, she knew, had only just begun. By morning, the house wore a different silence, polite on the surface, slippery underneath. Helena moved through rooms the way a librarian moves through stacks, touching nothing, cataloging everything. On the coffee table lay a folder that hadn't been there the night before. She paused. The top sheet had been angled with intention, as if someone wanted it to look casually misplaced. Columns of numbers, a bank logo, a line about secured assets. She slid the page back exactly as she'd found it and kept walking. In the hallway, she heard Clara's voice, the whispery kind that understands walls have ears. Yes, I told you she's agreeable," Clara said, then lowered it further. "No, we can't wait much longer. Rates might change." Footsteps, a quick laugh that didn't sound like real laughter. By the time Helena appeared in the doorway, Clara had turned to face a window, phone tucked at her shoulder. "Oh, just finalizing the florist for Sunday brunch," Clara said brightly. "Peonies, maybe dahlias, you know how picky I am." She smiled wide, too wide. Helena nodded. "Of course," she said, as if she cared deeply about peonies. "Let me know if you need the vases. I've saved the crystal ones Thomas gifted me." Clara blinked, a flicker crossing her face. "Right, those." That afternoon, Erin came home late with the kind of excuse a teenager might give. "Traffic," he said, then, "a last-minute thing with the crew. Then, I stopped to help a guy with a flat. He wouldn't meet her eyes. Helena only asked if he wanted something to eat. He said he wasn't hungry, but his stomach answered with a long, hollow sound that felt like a truth he couldn't say out loud. Helena packed a container anyway. "In case you change your mind," she said. He took it without thanks, then said awkwardly, "Mom, He stopped, shook his head, and disappeared down the hall. For a second, Helena saw the little boy again, the one who used to fall asleep with flour on his eyelashes after long Saturdays at the bakery. She needed steady ground. The bakery used to be that ground. On her way into town, she cut across Maple Street where the sycamores threw shadows like lace across the pavement. Helena liked to walk past the hardware store, the church, and the tiny clinic with the white trim where Dr. Samuel still worked 2 days a week. He spotted her at the crosswalk and lifted a hand. "Helena," he called, "you've been ignoring your appointments again." She laughed softly. "Is that a diagnosis or a complaint?" He stepped outside, stethoscope still around his neck like a promise. "Both," he said, then lowered his voice. "You doing all right?" "I'm breathing," she answered, which sounded braver than she felt. Samuel studied her. He had a physician's face, calm, practiced, hard to surprise. "I ran into Clara last week," he said carefully. "She mentioned big plans, travel, investments, a renovation maybe." He let the words float there. "Helena, you need to be careful. Not everyone smiling at you has your best interest at heart." Helena pressed her lips together. "You're not the first to use the word careful this week," she said. "Then let me be the last," he answered, kind but firm. "If you need a witness to anything, you come get me. I know how to listen and how to write things down." She nodded, grateful for the offer she might soon require. "Thank you, Sam," she said. "You always were the one to show up first." He shrugged. Hazard of the job and of friendship. On her walk back, memories rose like steam from a hot loaf. The winter after Thomas died, the pipes burst in the bakery at midnight. She remembered standing ankle-deep in icy water, hands numb, face wet with something she refused to call tears. Aaron was 12, thin as a broom handle, holding a flashlight steady, whispering, "Mom, you can do this." She had laughed through chattering teeth and said, "Of course I can, I have to." She learned how to patch drywall, argue with vendors, and knead dough with a fractured heart. When the ovens failed, she borrowed one from the church kitchen. When the landlord wanted a higher rent, she baked him a birthday cake with his mother's favorite frosting and slid the new lease across the table while he finished his second slice. She had survived by learning that persistence could wear down stone. Back at the house, the light had shifted to that late afternoon gold that makes everything look forgiving. It didn't forgive the papers on the coffee table. The folder remained, this time a corner protruded as if to say, "Go on, look." Helena didn't touch it. Not yet. First, she listened. No footsteps upstairs. No water running. The refrigerator clicked. Somewhere outside, a motorcycle coughed, then rolled away. She sat, pulled the folder closer, and opened it. A loan application. Pages stamped with a rush order. Numbers arranged like cliffs. Halfway through, her eyes caught a line that made her skin go cold. Secured by primary residence. Below it, a signature in looping strokes that imitated her hand well enough to fool a stranger. Not a mother. Her breath stayed quiet, but her hands began to shake. She turned page after page. A notary seal. Witness names she didn't recognize. Her supposed signature again, and again. She swallowed hard. Pain tightened behind her eyes, not the kind tears could solve, the kind that asks what else you missed while you were believing you were loved. Helena reached for her phone with movements so precise they looked rehearsed. She took photographs of every page, full frames, close-ups, the seal, the dates, the account numbers, the alleged signatures. She saved them twice, then emailed them to herself under a subject line only she would understand. Recipes old and new. A floorboard creaked upstairs. She slipped the folder back exactly as it had been, nudged the corner out again, stood, and walked into the kitchen. Her face had practiced this expression, the one that says nothing is wrong. The oven still held a whisper of heat from a morning she didn't bake. She turned the knob, watched a small blue flame come to life, and waited until the window glass fogged with a soft bloom. The house glowed. In that glow, a plan took shape, not a loud one, not a movie plan where the hero kicks down doors. Hers would be careful, legal, patient. The kind that doesn't snap, it closes. Clara breezed in, tossing her keys in a bowl like a bell ringing. "Oh, you're cooking," Clara said. "What a surprise." Helena didn't look up. "Just warming the room," she answered. Clara leaned against the counter, nails tapping. "By the way," she said, "there's a paperwork delivery coming tomorrow. All very standard. If the courier asks for you, just sign and hand it back. Easy." She smiled the way people smile on billboards. Helena turned then as if startled by a thought. "Delivery?" she asked, innocent as a sparrow. "Just forms," Clara said. "Insurance, you know, tedious stuff." "Of course," Helena said. "Tedious." She dried her hands, faced the window, and let Clara's reflection hover there like smoke. "I'll be sure I read them carefully." Clara's smile held. "No need," she said. "We're family." Helena's own smile was softer, but it had edges now. All the more reason, she said. Later, when everyone pretended to sleep, Helena went out the back door in her robe and stood on the little stoop, the night laid over the yard like velvet. The bakery's sign across the alley, Thomas and Helena, had a burned-out bulb in the ampersand. It made the name look like a sentence instead of a promise. She would fix that. Soon, Mrs. Whittaker's porch light clicked on, the door creaked. Can't sleep either. The neighbor called, pulling a cardigan closed with one hand. Something like that, Helena said. I made too much chamomile, Mrs. Whittaker offered. Come get some or I'll pour it over the roses. Helena laughed despite herself. Save the roses, I'll grab a cup. On the porch, steam drifted up from a chipped mug. You and Thomas used to dance at the harvest fair, Mrs. Whittaker said fondly. He had 2 left feet. He did, Helena said, smiling. He made up for it in kindness. Mrs. Whittaker's eyes softened. Then you already know what I'm going to say. Kindness requires a backbone, use yours. I intend to, Helena said quietly. Back in her kitchen, she turned the oven dial a touch higher and watched the flame sharpen. It licked the metal like a promise, steady and bright. She laid her palm on the warm counter and breathed in the faint perfume of cinnamon that no amount of scrubbing could erase from the wood. You wanted a fire, she whispered, her voice so gentle it could have been a prayer. You'll get one. Her phone buzzed on the table. A new email blinked in her inbox. Document signature request urgent. The sender's name wasn't a florist. Helena's chin lifted. Tomorrow would not arrive uninvited. The law office sat above a barber shop that had been there since Eisenhower. A brass bell chimed when Helena pushed the door, and a young receptionist with a tidy bun looked up. Good morning, do you have an appointment? I spoke with him last night, Helena said. Helena Raines. Mr. Morales is expecting you, the receptionist said, and her tone softened at the name. Straight down the hall. David Morales stood when Helena entered, 30s, tailored suit, sleeves rolled just enough to reveal a nicked wristwatch that had seen better years. He gestured toward a leather chair. Mrs. Raines, I'm David. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for taking me, Helena replied, sitting carefully. The room smelled faintly of lemon oil and paper. She took her phone from her bag with steady hands. I brought the photos. He waited as she air-dropped the files to his laptop. The screen filled with scans, loan documents, a notary seal, signatures that pretended to be hers. David's gaze narrowed. He didn't rush. He clicked, enlarged, zoomed on curves and pressure points. He took notes. It was the quiet kind of attention that eases the breathing of someone who's been holding it too long. Finally, he said, All right, I'm going to be direct. This is fraud. Whoever drafted this attempted to secure a loan against your home with a forged signature and an untrustworthy notary. I recognize the lender. Aggressive. They rely on speed and intimidation. He leaned back, fingers steepled. Don't confront them yet. Let them believe they are winning. And yes, hold on to your husband's will. It's your shield. Helena nodded. Her voice came out low. Thomas always said if the world ever turns against you, use the law. That's the only weapon they can't twist. David smiled, not with cheer, but with respect. Smart man. We'll do this properly. I'll draft a hold notice to the bank and a certified letter to the notary. I'll also prepare an affidavit for you. We won't send them yet. Timing matters. Meanwhile, you document everything. Dates, times, who said what. Even the weather if you can. Juries believe weather. She almost laughed. I can tell you wine direction by smell. I've spent 4 decades standing in front of ovens. That will help, he said, straight-faced, and she liked him for it. One more thing. If anyone brings you papers, never sign on the spot. Say you'll consult your lawyer. Use my name. People behave differently when they know you're not alone. My daughter-in-law prefers me alone, Helena said. Keeps her stories neat. David's expression didn't change, but the air cooled. Then let's tangle them. When Helena left the office, the barber downstairs was sweeping hair into a pile. He looked up, recognized her, and lifted his chin. "Morning, Mrs. Raines," he said. "Still making those almond croissants." "On good days," she said. "Make tomorrow a good one," he replied. On the sidewalk, the world seemed louder. A bus hissed to a stop. A teenager laughed into his phone. Somewhere a dog barked like it was warning the sun. Helena walked past the florist, where buckets of peonies crowded the doorway. Clara's voice from last night floated back. Peonies, maybe dahlias. Helena reached for a stem, felt the tight promise of it beneath her fingers, and left it exactly where it was. By afternoon, invitations began to bloom on Helena's kitchen counter like weeds. "Family dinner this Saturday," Clara said, breezing in, cheeks flushed with accomplishment. "A little celebration for new beginnings. Everyone will be here, your sister, the Whittakers, even Pastor Lee. I thought you'd enjoy being part of it." "Part of what?" Helena asked as if she didn't know. Clara's smile deepened. "Oh, come on, don't be so mysterious. Just a few signatures, a few toasts, a new plan for the house. You deserve to relax. Let us carry things for once." Helena dried a glass and set it on a towel. "I've carried heavier." Clara laughed as if it were a joke. "Dress nice," she said. "I'm thinking silver, it photographs well." Later, when Helena took out the good shawl, the blue one Thomas brought her from Santa Fe, she folded it slowly, smoothing the edges as if tucking in a child. Her hands didn't shake anymore. On the table beside her lay a small voice recorder she'd purchased that morning from the hardware store, 3 aisles down from the nails. The clerk, a boy with oil on his fingers, had said, "It's simple. 1 button to record, 1 to stop. Battery lasts all day." He'd winked. "For your memoir." "For remembering what matters," she had answered. Now she opened the back seam of the shawl with a seam ripper, slid the recorder inside, and stitched it shut with tight, even thread. When she ran her fingers over the fabric, the seam felt exactly as it had before. She whispered, "Good." She also prepared 3 sealed envelopes and wrote names in careful script. Pastor Lee, Mrs. Whittaker, David Morales-esque. Inside each she placed a copy of the forged documents, the photos, and a note in her hand. "If anything happens to me or if I go missing, please give this to the police." She added dates. She added weather. She licked the seals and pressed them closed with the flat of her thumb. At dusk, Aaron wandered into the kitchen, shirt wrinkled, eyes rimmed red. "Mom," he said softly. "Hungry?" she asked, as if hunger were the only thing he'd brought with him. "A little," he admitted, dropping into a chair. She plated stew and set it down, then poured water into a glass and placed that beside him, too. He stared at the steam as if it might write him instructions. "Clara says the party will help," he said. "She says people will see we're building something together." "What are you building?" Helena asked. He swallowed. "A future," he said, but it sounded like a question. She chose her next words with care. "A future that requires you to erase your past is a purchase, not a plan." He flinched. "You don't like her." Helena wiped the counter. "Liking is easy," she said. "Trust is costly." Aaron pushed a hand through his hair. "She's under pressure, investors, timelines. I feel like I'm drowning half the time." "You can only drown where you cannot stand," Helena said, and the old proverb sat between them like a chair no one dared move. "Find ground, Aaron." He nodded, eyes shiny. "I'll try." "Trying is a start," she said. When he'd gone, the house settled into that pre-party calm that always arrives before a storm. Helena walked across the alley to the bakery and flipped on the lights. Ovens lined the wall like sleeping animals. She moved among them, checking dials and seals, opening drawers that remembered her hands. In the office, beneath the framed photo of Thomas wearing a ridiculous paper crown from the first harvest fair they won, she opened the safe and took out the leather folder, the one he'd called the map. Inside were the deed, The will, the tax receipts, and a letter in Thomas's slanted handwriting that began, "If you're reading this, something went wrong." She didn't reread the rest. She knew it by heart. She slid the folder into her tote, then into the lining of her coat where she'd stitched a pocket no one would notice. On her way out, she nearly bumped into Pastor Lee, who had stopped under the awning to escape a quick burst of rain. "Evening, Helena," he said, shaking droplets from his hat. "Storm surprised me." "They tend to," she said. He glanced at the lit sign. "Saw your light, thought I'd tell you we'll be at Clara's on Saturday. She said it would mean a lot for the church to witness a new chapter." His eyes searched hers. "Should I be bringing more than a blessing?" "Bring your good pen," Helena said, "and your best memory." He chuckled, then sobered, catching something in her tone. "I'll be there early," he said. Back home, the invitations multiplied. Clara moved like a producer, calling caterers, texting cousins, practicing toasts in the hallway like lines for a show. "We're going to make this classy," she said to Aaron as if Helena weren't in the room. "String lights in the yard, a signature cocktail, the kind of night people remember." "They will," Helena said. "I can promise you that." "I knew you'd come around," Clara said, misreading on purpose. On Saturday, the house dressed itself in borrowed glamour. Lanterns hung from the oak. White chairs stood in straight rows. A hired photographer tested angles by kneeling in the grass. Helena wore her blue shawl. Aaron helped guests set plates on the long table. Clara shimmered in a silver dress that caught every bit of light and threw it back like coins. Mrs. Whittaker arrived with chamomile cake and a hug that lasted exactly 1 second too long to be ordinary. "I brought something for you, too," Helena said, slipping the older woman one of the sealed envelopes, "just in case I forget dessert recipes." Mrs. Whittaker patted her arm. "You never forget," she said. "Then consider it a souvenir," Helena answered. Pastor Lee came with his satchel and set it on a chair near the head of the table. "Good pen," he said, tapping the leather, "and good eyes." David Morales stepped into the backyard uninvited and unannounced, tie loosened, jacket folded over one arm. He greeted no one at first. He simply took a place by the fence like a neighbor who'd wandered by. When Helena reached him, he said under his breath, "I'm not here, but I am." "That's exactly where I need you," she said. Music drifted. Glasses clinked. The photographer asked for the beautiful trio, mother, son, daughter-in-law, to stand together. Helena obliged, her smile gentle, her eyes unreadable. As the camera clicked, Clara whispered, "We'll sign after dessert. The notary's on her way. I told her to be discreet." "The notary," Helena repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. A breeze lifted the edge of her shawl. She smoothed it down with one hand, feeling the small, hidden weight stitched into the seam. Her other hand slipped into her coat, grazing the leather folder that warmed against her side like a heartbeat. Across the yard, Aaron raised his glass. His voice shook as he said, "To family." It sounded like a prayer someone taught him to read. Helena tightened her grip on the shawl. "Let them believe they are winning," David had said. She could do that. She had done harder things in quieter rooms. The bell at the gate rang once. A woman stepped in carrying a briefcase and a stamp. Clara flashed her billboard smile. The guests turned in their chairs. Phones tilted up to catch the moment. Helena closed her eyes for a beat, hearing Thomas somewhere between the leaves and the lanterns. "Use the law. It's the only weapon they can't twist." She opened them again. The recorder hummed invisibly at her shoulder. The envelopes were safe in good hands. The will waited in leather. Her ace was ready. The backyard glittered under string lights Clara had ordered by the yard, each bulb casting a soft halo over the long wooden tables dressed in linen. A jazz trio played beneath the oak tree, their music weaving through the chatter of neighbors, cousins, and old friends. Glasses clinked, laughter swelled, and the scent of roasted lamb carried on the cool evening air. For everyone else, it was a celebration. For Helena, it was the stage her daughter-in-law had built for betrayal. Clara glided between the tables in her silver gown, hair swept back, a flute of champagne in her hand. Her voice carried like a performer's. "Tonight," she declared, smiling at the guests, "we celebrate family. Tonight, Helena will pass everything down to us, the house, the bakery, the future. She deserves rest, and Aaron and I will carry her legacy forward." Applause trickled through the crowd. Helena sat at the head of the table, shawl draped over her shoulders, her hands resting lightly on the unsigned contract before her. She didn't flinch. She didn't move. Her silence was read as weakness, and the room leaned in, ready for the surrender they assumed was coming. Aaron shifted in his seat, his face pale. He tried to smile when his wife touched his arm, but his eyes betrayed unease. Across the table, Pastor Lee frowned at the document. Mrs. Whittaker whispered to her husband, "She doesn't look ready to sign." He murmured back, "Maybe she doesn't have a choice." Helena took her time. She let the murmur spread, the expectation build. Then she pushed back her chair and rose slowly. The room fell quiet. Even the trio paused mid-note. She placed one hand on the contract, the other on her shawl, and lifted her chin. Her voice was calm, measured, and clear. "Before I sign anything," Helena said, "I'd like you all to hear something." Clara's smile faltered. "Helena, this isn't necessary." But Helena had already pressed the hidden button on the recorder sewn into her shawl. Speakers set up for background music crackled, then shifted to a new sound. Clara's voice, sharp and cruel, echoing over the yard. "The old woman won't know what hit her. Once she signs, she's out." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Forks clattered to plates. Someone muttered, "Did she really say that?" Another voice hissed, "God help her." Aaron's chair screeched against the stone patio as he turned toward his wife, eyes wide with disbelief. "Clara, what is this?" Clara's face drained of color. "That's not, no, that's taken out of context," she stammered, looking around desperately. She must have doctored it. David Morales, standing near the fence like a silent sentinel, finally stepped forward. His voice carried, steady and professional. "That's a direct, unedited recording. I can confirm its authenticity." The whispers grew louder. Clara's confident smile shattered into fragments, her painted composure slipping in front of the very people she had tried to impress. Helena let the noise rise, then lifted a hand. The crowd hushed. She reached into her coat and pulled out a leather folder, worn smooth from years of being touched. With deliberate care, she opened it and held up a document for all to see. "This," Helena said, her voice strong, "is my husband's original will, not a copy, not a draft, the true, notarized record of his wishes." She placed it on the table, fingers spread over the paper as though anchoring it with her very being. "It states clearly that this house, this bakery, and every acre attached to it belong to me. And no transfer, no loan, no signature without my full and willing consent can ever override it." The silence was deafening. Clara blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing like someone gasping for air. Aaron sat frozen, his knuckles white around his glass. Pastor Lee adjusted his spectacles and nodded, murmuring, "That's binding." Mrs. Whittaker whispered, her eyes never leaving Helena, "She's stronger than we ever knew." Helena scanned the faces around her, neighbors who once pitied her, relatives who thought she was fading, her son who had forgotten her strength. For the first time in years, they saw not a frail widow but the rightful matriarch. The room, the yard, the whole night shifted on its axis. Clara's voice broke, desperate now. "She's lying. She's manipulating you all." Aaron finally found his voice, though it cracked as he spoke. "Clara, that's enough." Helena lowered herself back into her chair, smoothing the shawl across her lap. Her calm was the sharpest blade in the room. "You wanted me silent," she said softly. "But silence is not surrender. Tonight you all learned that." The crowd remained hushed, waiting, unsure if the drama was over or only just beginning. The night, which Clara had meant to be her triumph, had turned into her undoing. And Helena. She sat in the glow of the lanterns, steady as stone, finally seen for who she truly was. For a beat, no one moved. The lawn lanterns hummed, the night held its breath. Then Clara lunged. She snatched at the leather folder like a gambler grabbing back a losing hand. "She's lying, this is fake!" She screamed, the polish stripped from her voice. Paper hissed under her fingers. David Morales stepped in, calm as a metronome. "Don't touch that," he said, and his tone, quiet, professional, cut through the panic. He produced a slim binder from under his arm. "For anyone who doubts," he added, opening to tabbed pages. Certified copies of the original will recorded with the county clerk 13 years ago. Notarized, indexed, and time-stamped. Here are the ledger references, and here, he held up a page. The authentication letter from the clerk's office I picked up this afternoon. Clara's hands froze midair. "You set me up," she whispered, eyes darting from the binder to Helena to the faces around them. "The truth doesn't need help," David said. "It just needs daylight." Phones rose like a small forest, red recording dots flickered. Guests leaned closer, some pretending they weren't, others making no pretense at all. Mrs. Whittaker, who had seen 3 wars and every harvest fair since 1969, murmured to her husband, "I told you the girl chewed too loudly on her own ambition." He squeezed her hand. "Easy, Ruth." "Let me see that," Pastor Lee said, moving to David's side. He adjusted his glasses and ran a finger down the margins. "Seals clean, witness line there, this is in order." He glanced up, steady and sad. "Clara, you've put yourself in a dangerous place." Clara shook her head like a swimmer refusing the lifeguard. "You're all in on it," she said, voice cracking. "This is theater. This is abuse." "Abuse," David repeated, unflinching, "would be coercing an elderly woman to sign away her home with forged paperwork and a complicit notary." He turned a page, tapped a line. "And this notary, already on the state's disciplinary radar, will file a complaint Monday." A collective hush rolled over the yard. The jazz trio had gone silent. Even the moth seemed to circle slower around the bulbs. Helena remained seated, one hand on the table, the other on her shawl, as if to anchor the night. Aaron stood. He didn't shout. He didn't posture. He simply looked at his wife as though seeing a stranger wearing her face. "Clara," he said, voice unsteady, "tell me you didn't say those things. Tell me you didn't call my mother." He swallowed. "Tell me you didn't plan this." Clara stared back, all silver and angles, and for a second something softer wavered there, fear, maybe, or the memory of a girl who once wanted simpler things. It disappeared as quickly as it came. "I did what we had to," she said, chin lifting. "I was building a future for us, for you, she's had her turn." Aaron flinched like the words struck skin. He turned to Helena, eyes shining. "Mom," he said, and his voice broke open. "I don't know what I was thinking. I let her turn me against you." Tears slipped down his face, quiet and hot. "I forgot who taught me to hold a flashlight steady in the dark." Helena rose, and the crowd parted around the tremor of that simple movement. She reached up and touched her son's cheek, the way mothers do when they're counting what's left. "Son," she said, firm, not cruel, "betrayal is a choice. Don't hide behind excuses. You forgot who built this home." Aaron bowed his head, grief folding him small. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." From the far table, someone muttered, "This is a lot." Another voice shot back, "It's justice." The photographer, who had been hired to capture toasts and twinkling lights, kept his camera low, unsure if this was the kind of history he was meant to catch. Clara moved again, swift and reckless. She grabbed the unsigned contract and lifted it like proof of something only she could see. "You planned this," she spat at Helena, the paper trembling. "You wanted to humiliate me." Helena didn't blink. "No," she said. "I wanted to live in my house." David extended his hand. "Give me the contract, Mrs. Carter." He waited. When she didn't move, his voice cooled further. "Or I'll call the sheriff and report attempted fraud in front of 50 witnesses and a pastor." The silver in Clara's dress stopped sparkling. She paused, breath shuddering, then slammed the contract onto the table so hard the glasses jumped. "You'll regret this," she hissed, but it sounded thin, the threat of someone who had run out of doors. "Enough," Pastor Lee said gently. "Clara, go home." Clara looked at the faces, the neighbors she'd courted, the elders she'd charmed, the camera phones suddenly heavy in their owner's hands. She threw Aaron a look that might have been plea or accusation, even she didn't seem sure. Then she turned and strode toward the gate, stumbling once on the lip of the path. The latch clanged behind her. Somewhere a dog barked again. No one chased her. The air rearranged itself. People exhaled as if they'd been underwater. The jazz trio, unsure, plucked a tentative chord. It died in the grass. Helena remained standing. She didn't smile. She didn't look victorious. She rested her palm on the leather folder and said, low enough that it made people lean closer to hear, "Justice doesn't shout, it stands." A murmur moved through the guests, approval, relief, the complicated sympathy communities feel when the wolf turns out to be the shepherd's favorite. Mrs. Whittaker's eyes brimmed. "Well done, dear," she said under her breath as she squeezed Helena's elbow. "I brought you chamomile for later." "Later," Helena said, and the word held more than tea. Aaron wiped his face with the back of his hand and tried to assemble himself. "Mom, I'll fix this," he said, but even he heard how childish it sounded. "You'll learn from it," Helena answered. "That's the work." David gathered the scattered papers with a motions clerk's efficiency. "I'll file the bank and notary complaints first thing," he said quietly to Helena, "and a cease and desist to the lender's collections division. They won't touch you." Pastor Lee slid his satchel strap over his shoulder. "I'll write an account for my notes," he said. "Times, names, what was said, in case anyone needs a memory later." "Thank you," Helena said to both men, then looked at the guests. "Please eat," she added, the hint of a smile at the edges. "The lamb will get cold." Laughter, small, grateful, broke like a wave on pebbles. Plates resumed their soft clatter. Someone turned the music back on, only to turn it down again out of instinctive respect. The party didn't exactly continue. It settled, the way a house settles after an earthquake, checking what still stands. Aaron stayed at Helena's side, hands empty, face younger without certainty. "Do you want me to walk you inside?" he asked. She considered him the boy who had held the flashlight, the man who had lost his hand on the map. "No," she said gently. "I want you to sit with me a while." They did. They sat, mother and son, beneath a sky full of small lights and bigger stars, while phone screens dimmed and neighbors pretended to discuss recipes so the family could reclaim a private inch of night. David moved to the fence again, a silent boundary line. Mrs. Whittaker boxed cake no one had touched. Pastor Lee spoke softly with two older men near the gate, their heads bent like commas in a sentence not yet finished. Much later, when the crowd thinned and the lanterns hummed on their last filament, Aaron whispered, "What happens now?" Helena lifted her shawl, feeling the hidden recorder warm against her shoulder, the last few minutes still captured in its patient memory. "Now," she said, "we clean up." He almost laughed. "You mean the dishes?" "I mean the life," she replied. He nodded, and this time it looked like understanding, not surrender. A sudden clatter at the gate snapped everyone's heads around. The latch rattled hard, then harder. The photographer jogged 2 steps, startled. David straightened, eyes narrowing. The gate swung wide, and a figure stepped back into the yard, breathless, hair wild, eyes burning with something that wasn't shame. Clara. She held a manila envelope in one hand and a small black device in the other. "If you think you've won," she said, voice low and shaking, "you don't know what I know." Her gaze cut to Aaron, then to Helena. "You want daylight, let's see how you like floodlights." The guests who hadn't yet left froze where they stood. Someone whispered, "What is that?" David's jaw tightened. A drive, he said under his breath, or a recorder. Helena's fingers tightened on the leather folder. The night shifted again, the way nights do right before a second storm. Morning sunlight spilled across Main Street, catching the glint of the bakery's new windows. Fresh paint brightened the brick facade, and a hand-lettered sign in Helena's careful script read, Rain's Bakery, family and tradition since 1978. The scent of rising dough and cinnamon filled the air, carrying down the block and pulling in customers like an invisible hand. People paused at the door not just for pastries, but because the place itself seemed to breathe again. Inside, Helena tied her apron with practiced grace. Aaron stood at her side, sleeves rolled up, flour dusting his forearms as though he'd finally remembered the language of his childhood. Across the counter, little Lily, his wide-eyed daughter, carefully pressed cookie cutters into the dough. "Like this, Grandma?" she asked, lifting a star-shaped piece. "Exactly like that," Helena said, her voice warm. "Every star counts, Lily, even the small ones." Aaron glanced at his mother, eyes softer than they had been in years. "I don't deserve to be here," he admitted under his breath. "Not after," Helena cut him off gently. "Then earn it now. That's how debts are repaid, with hands, with heart." The bell above the door chimed as the first customers stepped inside. Neighbors, old friends, even strangers who had heard whispers of what happened. Mrs. Whittaker arrived with a smile and her usual chamomile cake in tow. "This is for you, Helena. You fed us for decades. Now it's our turn to feed you." Behind her came Pastor Lee, carrying 2 trays of eggs from his hens. "For your morning batches," he said. "Consider it tithe in advance." Helena's eyes misted, but her voice held steady. "You've all given me more than you know. Thank you." Business thrived, but Helena's vision stretched beyond the register. In the evenings, when the ovens cooled, the bakery transformed into a classroom. A circle of women, widows, single mothers, those left with little but grief, gathered around Helena's wooden table. She showed them how to knead dough, how to balance recipes with budgets, how to stretch flour into meals and savings into security. "No woman should ever feel powerless just because she's alone," Helena told them, guiding one woman's trembling hands across the dough. "Bread rises if you give it time. So do we." David Morales stopped by one evening, his suit jacket slung over his arm. He watched quietly as the women laughed at Lily's flour-covered nose. Later, when Helena walked him to the door, he said, "You didn't just win your battle. You built a bridge for others." "I promised Thomas I'd never let this house or this bakery be wasted," Helena replied. "Turns out promises can grow bigger than we imagine." The story of her resilience spread. Tourists began stopping by, asking to taste the justice rolls or the freedom flan people jokingly named in her honor. Helena laughed at the titles but understood what they really meant. The food carried her story, and the story carried strength. One rainy afternoon, Aaron wiped down the counter while Lily practiced writing her name in the flour dust. He looked at his mother. "Do you think people will ever forget what happened?" Helena laid a tray of golden loaves to cool. "People forget details. They don't forget truth. And the truth is, we're still standing." As the bakery bustled, Helena often paused at the doorway, watching faces light up when the smell of cinnamon rolls met them. Each smile was a reminder that her life, cracked and tested, had not broken. It had rebuilt. That night, as the ovens dimmed and the town lights blinked on, Helena spoke her truth in a voice steady enough to carry through walls. "Respect is not something you beg for. It is something you protect. If anyone tries to strip you of dignity, remember, patience, truth, and courage will always be louder than lies." The screen faded, but her words lingered like the warm scent of bread. Patience, truth, and courage will always outshine lies. If this story inspired you, hit subscribe to Loving Truth Stories so you never miss the next journey of hope and resilience. Tell me your city in the comments. I can't wait to hear from you.